It's great to be here. I'm Roy Terry. I'm running for school board in District 5. My wife Helen and 2 children moved to Naples in 1978. Both of my children are graduates of Collier County Public School System, and my granddaughter is also a graduate of the Collier County Public School System. I worked in Collier County in the public school system for 36 years. I've been 10 years at Naples High School, where I was a teacher and a coach and athletic director. I've been 1 year at East Naples Middle School as an assistant principal, 3 years at the Ad Center, where I was a coordinator for physical education, volunteers, substance abuse prevention, health, and driver education, anything else they wanted to throw on that title. After the Ad Center, I went to Lely High School. I was assistant principal for 6 years, and then principal, or 5 years, and then principal for 6 years at Lely High School. Then I opened up Palmetto Ridge High School and was there for 6 years as the principal. The last 4 years I've been on the Collier County School Board. Community-wise, I just finished up a term as the president of the Rotary Club of Immokalee. I'm on the board of directors for the Champions for Learning. I'm also a trustee at my church, Cornerstone United Methodist Church. In the last 2 years, I've been the board of directors for the Florida School Board Association.
It's quite a history with Collier County Public Schools, and maybe 30 minutes isn't enough, but what changes have you seen, and what's for the better, what's for the worse?
Well, first of all, when I came down here, Dr. Ritchie was the superintendent, and it's probably been the longest serving superintendent we've ever had here in Collier County. It would be nice if we could stabilize that whole process again, not every 3 years be looking for a new superintendent, even though nobody's perfect. But I like to think that we can work with people and get them to improve through evaluations, discussions, and that type of thing. The school system has changed a lot in the last few years, just like the community. When I moved down here, Victoria Park was way outside of town. Who would want to live way out there? And Pine Ridge Road was the north end of town. And that little cemetery that's up there on the corner was like on the outskirts. And so the whole area has changed a lot, and the school system changed with it. We've had a lot of new schools. We've increased. At that time, we only had 3 high schools. Now we've got 8 high schools. So it's grown, and with it, the community's grown and brought new challenges.
Is a much bigger education system better than the one you had before, or?
Well, I personally like a little bit smaller high school, to be honest with you. The schools up around 2,000, in my opinion, is a little large. I'd rather have them be around 1,500 students. One of the biggest changes that we've seen is the minority population that's grown tremendously over the years, to where over 50% of our students are actually minorities now in the school system, which doesn't coincide with the population in the county as a whole. But in the school system, it's over 50% minority now.
You talked about getting some stability in that post of superintendent. Do you think that can be accomplished with Dr. Patton? And what kind of job do you think she's doing?
Well, the last few weeks, because of the extension vote, I've been out talking to a lot of people in the community, and because we have the final vote on that coming up on the 29th at our board meeting. And there are 2 questions there. One, should we have done the extension, and the other is her evaluation. Most of the people that I talk to are kind of split in terms of Dr. Patton. A lot of them feel very strongly that she's done a very good job in some areas, and in other areas she needs to improve on. One of the biggest areas to improve on probably has been in terms of the morale of teachers and principals. And I think those are things that I've been trying to work with her on. And I think she's made some changes there that should in the long run help that. And I hope that carries over. One of her real strengths, according to the people that I talk to, So communication with the community and working with the business community in town is probably one of the major things that she's done. And it was one of the things that when we hired the superintendent, that we wanted the new superintendent to be able to do.
What sort of things have you been working with her on to improve morale with the teachers?
Well, first of all, we gave the biggest raise in the state of Florida 2 years ago, or not this past year, but the year before that, to the teachers in Florida, and that came after the year before we had voted not to do the step increase. I had voted for the step increase, but the board voted 3-2 not to give that to teachers. So that was a tremendous improvement, and it improved our standing in the state. We're in the top 10 in most categories, and I think the lowest we are is about 14th in the state of all the counties in terms of teacher pay. So that was a big improvement. Also, we've been able to get the number of observations reduced almost in half in terms of the number of observations that they're going to have to do with teachers. We've also done that with principals, reduced that in half, and most of that is as a result of Dr. Patton and discussions that I and other board members probably have had with her that are areas that she needs to improve on. She's also worked hard with STEM to create different types of competitions throughout the community. So I think she's made some progress there, but we can always improve more.
You mentioned that you'd gotten split decisions, or when you talk to people out there in the community. What does the community think about not so much the job Dr. Patton's doing, but the fact that the contract was extended in the way that it was at the time that it was?
It's overwhelming that we shouldn't do that. That's just my, I mean, I've talked to all kinds of people. I've talked to people that are my supporters. I've talked to people that I don't know at all. I talked to people that I wouldn't consider my supporters, and I think it's overwhelming that the timing of that was not good.
You have, as you mentioned, a final vote then coming up on the 29th. In some cases, that might be seen as almost a formality because it had been approved once, and this is a sort of the second reading or second approval of it. Do you think it'll get a deeper hearing than it would have maybe normally under other circumstances?
I will think it'll get a lot deeper hearing. I think, first of all, I think there'll be a lot of people there. Second of all, I think that I'm intending to address it. Of course, at the last meeting, I was up in Gainesville and on the phone, and what I had basically remembered, I mean, we've always talked about superintendent's contract whenever we've discussed evaluations and those types of things. As a matter of fact, back in 2012, we extended her for 2 years, basically in the same way at the same time during an election process, which, of course, there wasn't anybody running against Ms. Curatolo or Ms. Sprague, so it never really came to the front. And being up in Gainesville, I voted basically thinking along those same lines. And then when I got back home, I realized, you know, this isn't a good thing. And I went out to said, I'm going to look and talk to as many people as I can. I went to Everglades, talked to people down there, talked to people in Immokalee, talked to people all around Naples and the Naples area. And like I said, it's overwhelming that people. And it's not the evaluations, it's the extension, the way it was done, and that type of thing.
As a board member, what do you take away from that experience in terms of the feedback you've gotten on that from the community?
Probably the thing that I take away from it right now is that, number one, we need to, if we're going to discuss a contract or extension, we need to make sure that that's advertised ahead of time. It's very easy to say, you know, we're going to discuss an evaluation and also the superintendent's contract. You can put that in the notice, notification. So that's the big thing that I've gotten out of it. And I just think we need to keep talking to people and listen to hear what they have to say.
The term Common Core comes up a lot in candidates' discussions this election. Do you have any thoughts on Common Core and what it may do to or for the school system here?
Yeah, first of all, I like having standards. We've had standards in Florida since the 70s. Sunshine State standards have always been part of the educational process in Florida. But back when they started, local school districts had more control over how they reached those standards, what type of curriculum they used, type of teaching methods. Teachers had more control. My problem with the Common Core is not so much the standards part of it. It's, I want more local control in education. I think we as a school board should know better what is good for our community as opposed to somebody someplace else in the state that may have a whole different idea about what the school system should be doing. So I am against Common Core because I am for local control of education. Now that doesn't eliminate the state altogether. I think the state has some responsibility to make sure that districts are meeting the standards and also setting graduation qualifications and those types of things. But I think the state and federal government have gotten way too involved in local decisions.
As a school board member, is there anything you can do about it at this point? I mean, it seems like it's a train rolling down the tracks.
Well, what I'm hoping is the last 2 years I've been working with Florida School Board Association. I've gotten to a point now where, you know, when you first start on those types of things, nobody pays much attention to you. But after 2 years, I do have people now that are talking and listening, and we're talking about different things. And so my hope is in a second, if I get a second term in office, to continue with the Florida School Board Association, to keep talking to them, to get with legislators, and to make sure that people understand what we need to do. So I'm hopeful that I can access that conduit to get into people that make the decisions. The problem is you have legislators from all over the state that are making decisions based on their home community, and if they have a strong following in the legislature, they're going to get something passed. Take the school starting date, for example. You know, we can't start any earlier than the week before Labor Day. I would like to start earlier than that. I think it's important because I like to get the first semester done before a winter break. And that whole thing is being governed by the I-4 corridor because they want kids available to work in Disney World and other places. So that's what's difficult sometimes to figure out. So well, hopefully if we get up there and have a voice, we can get some of those changes done, but we have to have a voice up there.
But doesn't Lee County start its school at least a week before yours?
This is the first year that Lee County is not going to be able to start early. Lee County was an A school district, and then 2 years ago, they dropped down to a B, I think, and then they dropped down to a C this year before this past year. And then if you're not an A, you got to be an A twice before you can start earlier. In other words, you can be an A school district 1 year, but you still got to start later. Then if you're an A school district the second year, you can start again. And it's the same way if you drop down. So this year is the first year that Lee County is in the same boat. We met with the legislatures up there with the Lee County Board at the same time. And this is the first year that they've been pushing to eliminate that rule. That local school districts should be able to set their own time for when they want to start school.
You mentioned the school grading system. What's your feeling as far as how the state is implementing that? Does it need reformed?
Well, do you want the state grading system from 2 weeks ago or this week or 2 weeks from now? You know, that's how I feel about the state grading system. Now, the whole thing about the state is that they can't. We recommended that they wait 2 or 3 years before they implemented this new system. And the reason for that is I would like for them to be able to come in with a plan and say, this is where we're going to be 1 year after the next. I mean, just look at the lowest 100 schools. We had last year, the lowest 100 schools had to go an hour longer in the afternoon. Basically cost the school system about $500,000 to do that. We had one school that was doing that last year in the under 100, okay? All of a sudden this year now, they decide to jump it up to the lowest 300 schools. Well, fortunately, we budgeted in our budget for 8 schools to be in that in that area. We had 7 that were in it. So we actually saved $500,000 by doing that, but we had it budgeted to do that. But Lee County budgeted for 5 and they got 9. So now they've got to come up with $2 million more to keep those schools going. And this is all a result, plus look at the teachers at Eden Park who work all year long to try to get themselves out of the lowest 100 schools. And then all of a sudden they're celebrating because they're going to get out of this, oh no, it's 300 now. Well, fortunately they made it out of the 300 too, which is great. But, you know, you can't keep changing things each year. You have to set standards and have people work towards them. And so the state system, I'm not against evaluations. The problem is we developed a test years ago that was used to evaluate students and their progress. And then for teachers to be able to look at that test and say, hey, Johnny needs to work on fractions, he needs to work on grammar. And then all of a sudden, we made that test also to be used for evaluating schools, evaluating teachers, you know, and there are probably 8, 9 different things now that one test evaluates. And you all know that you build tests specifically to measure certain things. And it's not working, in my opinion.
With so many of the lower graded schools being out in the Immokalee area and concentrated in certain geographic pockets, how do you as a school board member, how do you tackle that problem?
That's a good question because it's, you know, it's funny, but we had 2 F schools last year. Both of those schools, because of the emphasis on them, are not F schools this year. But now we got 3 more that dropped down to be F schools. My thing is I would like to see us do something with parents, develop some type of program for parents to be involved in their children's education. Now, that's difficult. You're talking about a community out there that's working in the fields, that leaves early in the morning, gets back late at night. But there've got to be ways that we can bring the parents in and then train those parents on how they can help their students do better. Because if we can figure out a way to get the parents involved, and most of the time, you know, in any school, if you provide a meal, they will come. You know, so maybe we need to look at that and develop different ways to get parents in there. But I think if we're going to improve those schools out there consistently, we have to get the parents involved in their children's education in some way.
What about charter schools in Immokalee, but in the county as a whole? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they good in some cases? Not good in some cases?
Well, it's kind of like everything else. Of course, they're public schools, and we've got I think 5 in the county right now. We've got some that are great. I mean, the charter school down on Marco, the middle school, is a fantastic charter school. The RCMA out in Immokalee now, I think they're up to a B this year. And those are all migrant kids. You know, the thing that I've seen in charter schools is it all depends on the leadership in the school. The person that's leading that school, if they have their ducks in a row and know where they want to be, that charter school is going to be a good charter school. But we've also had some real bummers. We had to close one out in the Immokalee this year. I mean, kids were just sitting in rooms, getting no education. They had 3 principals in the course of the first 3 months. Those kids, and I don't know, I want to check with the superintendent. I want to know how many of those kids went to those schools that became F schools. And they lost half a year of education. Now, we also had a new charter school here in Naples that was an F school this year. So you have a great expanse. Some of them are really good, some of them are really bad, just like schools every place else. I'm not against charter schools. I think charter schools should, number one, offer something different than what the public schools offer. And number two, they need to be controlled by the district that they're operating out of. I'm totally against the state being in control of charter schools and telling us we have to keep them, or we have to admit them, or we have to approve them. I think that's up to the local school district. But I don't have any problem with the.
As it stands now, how much control does the school board have in
Right
that
now,
matter?
we pretty much can control that. But they almost passed some legislation this year that would have taken more of the control up to the state level. Fortunately, it didn't go through, but you never know. I mean, in the legislature, they have, you know how it goes. You have a bill over here that's gonna pass. You have one over here that's not gonna pass. So on the last day of the legislature, they stick that one on this other bill, and that's how it gets passed. And so all of a sudden you think, "Phew, we're not gonna get that, thank goodness," and then all of a sudden it's being passed in the state.
What would be the rationale for giving more control to the state for these charter schools?
I have no idea. I mean, I don't know why they want them, other than the fact that they're in support of charter schools, and they want to make sure that charter schools grow. And I'm not against growth of charter schools. You know, we've approved them down here. And my whole thing is, are they functioning right for our students? Is it good for our students? And if it is, we should have more of them. If not, then we ought to close them down and move on.
How much opportunity as a school board member then, you said that leadership is key, do you get to, how thoroughly do you get to vet the leadership coming in of a proposed
The
charter
only
school?
thing you have, the only ability you have is in the initial application. And that's why it's important that we keep it local, because we do get to see what that application is. Now, the one we closed down out in Immokalee was a national group that has charter schools a lot of different places. But they just didn't do their homework when they opened up out in Immokalee, and all of a sudden, school year was on them, and they were pulling people out of the woodwork to man it. So the application, and that's why we got to keep it local, so we can evaluate those things and make sure that the right people are in place, the right systems.
Do you think having board members of charter schools on the school board then would be a conflict with control?
Well, you know,
over this?
I asked that question because Julie Sprague, of course, who was a teacher, had to give up her teaching position to move to be on the school board. And so I wanted to make sure, because I hired Kelly Lichter. I hired her at Palmetto Ridge. She was a social studies teacher for me out there, good teacher. And but I went to the superintendent and I said, listen, I don't want Kelly or anybody else, if they're associated with the charter school, to find out after they run that they have to give that up if that's what they want to do. So they looked into that. They came back and told me, no, she doesn't have to give that up, that all she would have to do is recuse herself in case something involving a charter school comes up on the board agenda. So, you know, I had our attorney look into it, and it was perfectly all right, and so I'm moving on with that. That's other people's business.
Some of the other candidates that are in the various races for school board are saying that they're finding fat in budget, which you obviously as a school board member have approved. What's your assessment on how trim the budget is now?
You know, it's tough because 64% of our budget goes to teacher salaries. Another 20% goes to support staff, like tutors, aides in the classroom, things like that in the schools, administration in the schools. So that's 84% of the budget right away goes to just things that are happening in school. So where do you look to cut? The school system has another 16% that you could use to cut from. Now there are places there probably that we can find stuff to cut. You know, it's just like when I look at the budget, you know, things like we do a drug program for our athletes to test them for drugs. I personally have a problem with that, because if we're going to do that, we ought to be doing it to all students. You know, it shouldn't just be athletes. It should be all students. And I also feel that we do that, and it costs us probably a couple $1 million to run that program, or $1 million. And that's money, in my opinion, that I don't know that we're getting our money's worth out of, just to say that we're testing people, you know, for substance abuse. You know, how many times have we seen in the paper that anybody's you know, we're spending this money to do that. So that's one area that I think, I would like to hear from the people that are saying fatten the budget, what specifically would you cut? Would you cut teacher salaries? Would you cut aide salaries? Would you cut the transportation budget and only pick up half the kids? I don't know, you know, so I rely a lot on, I know there are some people running that are economic experts. I'm not an economic expert, I'll tell you right up front. I mean, I know basically how the budget works and all that, but I'm not a CPA or anything like that. But we've cut $40 million in the last 4 years out of the budget. And we have not affected student programs or student activities. And that's a big one with me. I want to make sure that we don't affect student programs or student activities. So you've got to find other areas or other places to cut money out of. So in the last 4 years, we've cut basically about $40 million. And we're still looking this year because I've talked to the superintendent. And when the referendum runs out, in what is it, 3 years or whatever it is, I want to make sure that we're zero budgeted on that. I don't want to have to go back to the community and ask for another referendum to move money over from capital to operations. I want to make sure that we're running operations out of operations. And so we're still making cuts this year that are going to go into effect that I have not seen the total cuts yet. But she sits down with principals and with other people in the community and looks at ways that we can cut. What principals say, what can you do without? What are we doing out there now that we can get rid of? You know, the ad center basically is 3.5% of the budget. That's about $14 million. You know, people say cut at the ad center. There are probably places there that we could cut a little bit, but you're not going to make big savings there with only a total of $14 million in there.
That's the salaries and the maintenance.
Yeah.
And that building.
Well, it might not be the maintenance, it's mainly salaries.
When you're cutting though, like they cut the janitorial staffs from the school. Do you think that was a good move? Because what I hear and what I observe is that the maintenance.
Well, let me tell you, as a principal, I was not for privatizing the custodial staff, okay? And my main reason is my custodians at the school where I was the principal took a lot of pride in that school. And I made sure that I went down and visited with them and talked with them and said, hey, you guys are doing a great job. You know, and most of the time, those people, if you talk to them that way and are honest with them, they'll take pride in their work and what they're doing. Privatization, I'm afraid, sometimes takes that motivation away. And so it's a difficult thing. I was not for it, and I also felt that some of those people had been with the system for like 25 years or something like that, and were close to retirement. And we should have made sure at that time that we placed them in some other position where they would get to complete their retirement. You know, that really hurt some people who had been longtime members of the Collier County school system. Now, would I re-implement a custodial system again? It's going to cost you a lot of money. You know, so where would you want to spend that money? I would rather spend it on an 8th period day for our high schools. You know, we're running out of opportunities for kids to take classes in high school because of all the requirements to take extra math and extra English classes and everything else by the state. And so art, music, physical education, technology, things like that are being hurt because kids don't have the elective classes to take anymore. They're taking maybe 2 or 3 maths and a couple of Englishes and social studies and everything else. And so I would rather, if I was going to spend money, I would spend it on an 8th period for the high schools, not reestablishing a custodial thing again. That's where I would spend it.
We're running out of time. Any final questions?
Just quickly, are you receiving financial support from any organization?
I was endorsed by the CCEA, which is the teachers group in town. They gave me some financial support. Others are all mostly individuals. I think I don't have my thing with me, but I've run pretty much a a close vested campaign without much. I'll be honest with you, I haven't really gone out and sought a lot of donations. We've gotten some. I've got some equipment that I'm using from the last campaign I had, so that always pays off.